Sell it. Or speaks.
Where is she?
Cass.
Where is she?
There will be times when the struggle seems impossible. I know this already. Alone, unsure, dwarfed by the scale of the enemy. Remember this. Freedom is a pure idea. It occurs spontaneously and without instruction. Random acts of insurrection are occurring constantly throughout the galaxy. There are whole armies, battalions that have no idea that they've already enlisted in the cause. Remember that the frontier of the rebellion is everywhere, and even the smallest act of insurrection pushes our lines forward. And then remember this. The Imperial need for control is so desperate because it is so unnatural. Tyranny requires constant effort. It breaks. It leaks. Authority is brittle. Oppression is the mask of fear. Remember that. And know this. The day will come when all these skirmishes and battles, these moments of defiance, will have flooded the banks of the Empire's authority, and then there will be one too many. One single thing will break the siege. Remember this. Try.
Welcome, Masters and Padawans, to episode 566 of Full of Sith. It's me, Bryan Young. With me, as ever, my delightful co-host, Holly Frey.
Hi, Bryan Young.
Hi, Holly Frey.
Como ça va?
I'm swell. How about yourself?
I'm the sillies, apparently.
That's fine. You with the sillies is just terrific. And it's a great way to start the episode today, because I don't know.
It may not always be silly.
Yeah, no, it might not always be. In fact, I can probably guarantee it's not always going to be silly. I don't know. So, we were casting about for an episode topic to discuss this week, and we thought it would be really good to kind of talk about politics.
Always the best thing to talk about. So light and casual.
Yeah, no, it's totally. So if you don't want the heartburn of hearing about politics as they relate to Star Wars, in-universe politics of Star Wars, or how real-life politics might relate to Star Wars, both past historical, going back to the Roman Empire or anything like that, all the way up to the present day, maybe this isn't the episode for you. I think most of our listeners are kind of tuned into this sort of thing, though, so I think this is fun for people, and it's something we haven't done in a long time, and I think it was kind of funny that when Holly and I when we were talking about this, and we were both sort of like, what are we going to talk about this week? We were both we had the three little dots for texting, and we both kind of crossed paths with the same idea. And I was like, yeah, I think that means that our head is in the right place. But using Star Wars as sort of a coping mechanism for the current political climate.
Yes.
And I think that's a healthy thing, especially with its themes of resistance. And I think that if you are not in a mode of resistance right now, then you might not find a lot of entertainment in this episode.
Fair.
If you're not in a mode of resistance right now, I can't imagine that you're a huge fan of the show anyway, though, because I kind of feel like we wear a lot of this on our sleeve.
Yeah. I mean, I know that is the case. We do have listeners who do not align politically with us, because every once in a while one of them will pop up and say something to me online. But I don't think it's very many.
Yeah. And I don't want don't want anybody to think that if you don't align with us politically that we don't want you listening. I absolutely do. I'm hoping that by listening to us, even if you don't agree with us, that maybe you can come to some understanding about why there are folks who are needing something like Star Wars to help cope with feelings about what's going on in the world.
Yeah.
And help build some empathy about why people are making comparisons to the Empire, and making comparisons with what needs to happen, and sort of like people battening down the hatches to the Empire, and to the Resistance, and comparing what happens to that resistance or rebellion. Or a lot of people are really finding solace in Andor, almost pretty specifically.
I know I am.
Yeah. And in a lot of the scenes of resistance there. So I would hope that people don't feel like turned off by that. If you don't agree with us, or you're not feeling that anxiety, that a lot of folks are. More than half the country, actually, more than half the U.S. And if you're not in the U.S., I know there are a lot of folks around the world who are feeling that because of the destabilizing effect that unstable leadership in the United States can have everywhere else.
Yeah.
And they're even in a worse off position about it because there's literally nothing they can do about it.
Right.
So, and for those of you who do listen from abroad, hopefully this will kind of give you a window into how at least two weirdos who love Star Wars think about things, and how the culture here sort of views Star Wars through that lens or something.
I think that was very well put. Very judicious.
Yeah. So I think the first thing is that I would like to get out of the way is that there are folks out there who kind of say, like, Star Wars has never been political, and it's never had a reflection on real world politics. And I kind of want to just get that out of the way first, because that's not the truth.
Yeah, I'm not sure how anyone lands there. I don't want to be demeaning, but like, aside from the fact that it obviously, mimics in many ways and even references real world politics. I mean, there's a reason stormtroopers are called stormtroopers. George Lucas has said that it's absolutely a reference and inspired in many ways by the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
So I find myself going, what are you watching? Like, are they just keying into, I don't know, TIE fighters and lightsabers?
Yeah, so George Lucas has talked a lot about how the iconography of the Empire comes directly from Nazis, right? Nazi Germany. The Empire is sort of the Nazis, and that evil empire was also patterned after the United States in the Vietnam War, and that the technologically diminished, the technologically underadvantaged rebels were very much the Viet Cong, trying to create a place of their own that was a better place for themselves, but the Empire couldn't stand for that, and were trying to colonize them and enforce their will upon them. Was the Empire, right? Was the United States, was a he very much looked at Palpatine as Richard Nixon. If you go back to those old interviews or interviews that he gave talking back about it, Richard Nixon was his starting point for Palpatine. And that makes a lot of sense if you're a young filmmaker and a very young progressive leftist filmmaker who spent your time preparing Apocalypse Now to be your next film project, and very entrenched in the Vietnam War and very adamantly anti-war, that you're going to find a lot of sympathy with the Vietnamese and wanting to support the troops by getting them out of there. And really wanting to see a story. It makes a lot of sense where Biggs and Luke want to join the Empire to defect to fight against it, right? Because that's kind of the message he was trying to put out there, like, yeah, join up to get out of it to fight against it.
You have made me think something about this issue that we've been discussing of how people can perceive Star Wars as not political. Because the Empire does, as you just said, become this pastiche of both imagery from Nazi Germany and the U.S. during the Nixon administration. And do you think that the commingling of those two things has made some people feel it more from a distance? They're like, oh, he's just borrowing from things. He's not actually referencing them. Do you know what I mean?
Like they're saying, like, well, he couldn't possibly mean that the U.S. has Nazi tendencies.
Right, like those two things that have always been historically held rather separately as concepts, right? The US and Nazi Germany. In combining them together, does it make it, for some people, I mean, to me, it's obvious that you can have multiple reference points for an idea, but I'm trying to understand the ideology and the mindset of someone who's like, nope, not political. If it is that commingling that makes it feel enough like a fantasy scenario that they think it's just like the way you might, I don't know, wear a beret but not say you're French. I'm trying to understand.
Well, I don't know. Like, I think it's the same. I don't understand, because I think it's a lot of the same people who say, like, well, Star Trek wasn't always woke. Like,
oh my goodness,
and it's like, wait a second, did you not see the episode where Kirk kissed Uhura in the first interracial kiss on TV?
Uh-huh.
Did you not see the episode with Frank Gorshin where Kirk and Spock are like, are you people seriously, like, arguing over people who are black on the left side of their body and saying they're silly and because you're black on the right side of your body?
Yeah, I feel like Star Trek is so heavy-handedly political that I don't know how you go like, oh, this was never never progressive. It was just about space.
Well,
I can't even say it.
And George Lucas made reactions to people who said, like, I mean, he did react to when people were, like, making criticisms about it from a political perspective, like there's that famous appearance of Carl Sagan's where he was like, why is everybody white? And George Lucas kind of took that personally and was like, very, like, all of a sudden we had Lando, right? It wasn't a whole lot, but it was George Lucas, like, taking that to heart and going like, oh, he's right.
Yeah.
I still have to work with all the characters I have, but I can add another one. And then
arguably one of the best ones.
Yeah. And then when people didn't get the Vietnam allegory, he took it a step further, and that's where the Ewoks are. Like, the Ewoks are literally, like, if you can't draw the parallel between the Empire and the US and the Ewoks and the Viet Cong, like,
yeah,
they're literally, like, throwing sticks and stones at the technologically superior Empire, and it's that story. And then when Lucas came about with the prequels, everybody was like, we just want to see him, Vader hunting Jedi. And then Lucas was like, actually, let's talk about taxes.
Right.
And, it was Lucas wanting to talk about how democracies are given away. They're never taken over. They're given away from the inside.
Right.
And it's because of misinformation. It's because of the corruption of money. It's because of the corruption of corporations. And in the prequels, he showed us a world where corporations have a seat at the senatorial table, right? The Trade Federation gives us we see that the Trade Federation and the corporate alliances and the banking guilds, like all of these people have seats at the Senate.
And again, not light-handed. Halle Bertoni, for heaven's sakes.
Yeah, Halle Bertoni is one of the representatives of the Kaminoans who is trying to get she's trying in the Clone Wars. She's trying to hand over money, hand over fist from the Republic to the Kaminoans to get another like war profiteering contract. That obviously is a direct reference to Halliburton, Dick Cheney's war profiteering company.
Uh-huh. Sorry,
trader...
I jumped ahead to Clone Wars, but all of those
fine,
politics to me are part of one bigger, you know what I mean? Like
Newt
they're all
Gunray.
pieces of the same big thing.
Newt Gunray is Newt Gingrich and also Ronald Reagan, right? Gunray is Reagan sort of transposed, and Newt Gingrich and Ronald Reagan, if you look at someone who George Lucas despised Ronald Reagan and even sued him to get him to stop calling his boondoggle to hand a whole bunch of taxpayer money over to the missile defense program, Star Wars.
Yeah.
Ronald Reagan took the popularity of Star Wars and tried to funnel it into a massive taxpayer giveaway to war profiteers. And he tried to label it Star Wars, and George Lucas did his best to try to stop that. So these corporate profiteers like the Trade Federation bearing names similar to Reagan's makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And not very subtle. That's the part where I'm like,
yeah,
none of this is subtle.
Yeah. And then you've got Lott Dodd, who's named specifically after Trent Lott and Chris Dodd. Trent Lott was a Republican senator. Chris Dodd was a Democratic senator. And Chris Dodd was, although he was a Democratic senator, was very, very heavy-handed and he ended up running the MPAA after Jack Valenti. And he had a lot to do with like Hollywood stuff. And George Lucas was a notorious opponent of sort of Hollywood and its machinations and sort of the politics that were there. And Chris Dodd fit in very well, like I said, to the point of becoming the head of the MPAA. And that was something that George Lucas always very much fought against. And so you have that senator representing those interests. And he looked at all those people as causing the gridlock that made the country that he lived in, the United States, not work. And that was that gridlock that allowed a demagogue to make populist promises to people and blame the gridlock that he was personally fanning the flames of, vote for him to come into office. And it was him being prescient in ways that were really obviously Phantom Menace came out in 1999 and he was trying to warn people about this demagoguery, and he was warning people about, even then, Newt Gingrich was the Speaker of the House, and he was telling people that we were going to halt the Clinton agenda so that they don't get anything through, and that we're only going to, pass Republican stuff so that we benefit Republicans. And he was really the start of the gridlock and division in the U.S. Ronald Reagan really was, but Newt Gingrich really escalated it.
As a Georgian, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's all I got to say on that one.
And this came out in 1999. And George Lucas was basing this look at history, at political history. He was looking at the fall of Rome. He was looking at these sorts of bits of history, and it looked very prescient when George Bush won in 2000. Well, he didn't win, but that's a different podcast. I mean, and if you go back and look, he even lost Florida by a number of votes, but that's again also a different podcast. But so when George Bush took office, that's a much better way to say it because he didn't win. When he took office, it was during production of Attack of the Clones that 9/11 happened. And there were, obviously some things that he said in the lead up to the Iraq War, where when George Bush took office, like it didn't take a genius to see, when that happened in 2000, as soon as they declared the election for him, I think pretty much everyone with an understanding of history and politics were like, it doesn't matter what happens. He's going to take us back to war with Iraq.
Yeah.
It didn't matter what the pretense was. He was going to drum up or gin up something to take us back to war with Iraq. And as George Lucas was building Attack of the Clones, he looked at that and said, like, how is Palpatine taking power? And that was his plan for the Clone Wars the whole time, right? And this is, again, an old story in history. Kurt Vonnegut wrote about this in his book Sirens of Titan, right? Where if you want to unite a people and raise a leader from them, you unite them against a common enemy. And so George Lucas was doing this with the Republic against the Separatists and the Jedi, and corroding that trust in the Jedi. And this is something that George Bush was doing against Iraq. And so some of the quotes that were coming out of George Bush's mouth when they popped up in Revenge of the Sith, in one of his State of the Union addresses, I believe it was, he said something like, if you're not with us, you're with the terrorists, in very black and white, and it very coincidentally, or maybe not so much, popped up in Revenge of the Sith. If you're not with me, then you're my enemy.
Right. I will say this.
Yeah.
One of the things I have sort of enjoyed amongst my own generation of Star Wars fans, because let's face it, like, a lot of people in my age group were not kind to the prequels. Yeah. But I have had a number of people who kind of complained about the prequels and talked crap about them in the ensuing, and being like, I don't want a movie about politics and trade routes and, tariffs, etc. Them realizing some years later, like, oh wow, George Lucas really understood what was going on globally in a way none of us realized. I'm like, some of us realized.
Yeah.
I do like that there have been some people having that revelation of like, oh, the prequels are super important in terms of their messaging and what they are actually dealing with as subject matter. And I'm like, I'm glad it came later rather than never, but yeah, dude.
No, I really wish that, like, I would trade prequel hate on the internet. I would rather accept more prequel hate on the internet like I used to than, because I mean that it really changed. Like when people that reappraisal of the prequels did happen right after Trump took office the first time. And it was like, oh, we did just give away our democracy. Like these things are bad. And when people started reappraising it, it was like, oh, yeah, you're absolutely right. Like people were like, George Lucas got it. He understood. Like he was warning us and we didn't listen. And I would trade, like I'd rather have the internet hate for the prequels than I would Trump presidencies.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
But so that was where George Lucas was. And the Clone Wars really doubled down on it in so many ways. Like you brought up Halle Bertoni. Like there are episodes about corruption in corporations, right? Like even the episode called Corruption, which if I have to pick a least favorite episode, it's probably that one. And it's not because of the message that it has. It's just because that it's a remake of The Third Man, and it's just such a shallow comparison of The Third Man that I want it to be so much better. But the message is still really good, and it's that there are like, do you remember this episode? This is set on Mandalore. And
it's the milk.
Yeah, the sports drinks on Mandalore that they're selling in the schools, and they're just like, they're cutting them down, but they're poisonous, and so it's killing these students because they're diluting them to make more profit off of them, and it's killing kids, and they don't even really care because they're making more profit.
Yeah. And
it's like, can you imagine a corporation today doing that?
Kinda.
Yeah. I mean, like, every time there's an E. coli recall, or like mad cow disease, or foot and mouth, or whatever it is, how many people have to die before the recall happens? And then when the recall happens, I mean, like, do they get fined? Right? Like, and how much do they get fined compared to their bottom line? Those fines aren't like somebody needs to go to jail, and the CEO needs to go to jail, and the company needs to be broken up. Otherwise, there's no disincentive to just keep doing it because no one actually pays a price. Those fines are speed bumps to them. They're not actually punishments.
Right.
And that corruption episode sort of gives a very naive view where they arrest the smugglers that did it. And it's like, oh, how sweet. That's never going to happen in the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of talk of deregulation in a lot of corporate spaces, and that means that those kinds of things can only continue and get worse with even fewer repercussions, which is obviously problematic and dangerous.
Yeah, no, and I think that's one of the things that, like, I'm really worried about, is that that's one of the things I'm worried about, because like, all of those things are there for a reason. Every time there's a new regulation, it's because something horrible happened. And there's this podcast I listen to a lot that seems to delve into a lot of these times. It's called Stuff You Missed in History Class. Like, every time there's a new little gadget that helps you get out of a theater faster, it's because hundreds of people died horribly because that gadget didn't exist.
Yes.
Like, because of a horrible theater fire, right?
Yes. I mean, on a smaller scale, right? I had a boss once who I forget where we were, that we had to read a safety manual for a company. Like, it wasn't our organization, because I was working in a library at the time, but he was like, keep in mind because I think some of us might have been looking through an old safety manual that had come into the library with a donation, and we were like, these are really kooky rules, and he was like, every kooky rule that you read is in whatever documentation because somebody made that have to be written down by screwing up in that way. And I'm like, oh yes. And so when we talk about it on history class, it's, on a more, I don't want to say epic scale, but it's usually on a larger public health or safety kind of scale. But even down to like little stuff, like, no one should shred paper on Fridays for whatever reason. Like, almost any rule that you read that you think is obvious, or, any piece of legislation that you think is common sense and doesn't need to be there, needs to be there because somebody didn't have that common sense. So
yeah, like, and it's something like those regulations, like, companies will skirt those regulations. Companies are already trying to skirt those regulations, and they're on the books, and we have the regulations so that we can punish them for skirting them. By not having the regulations, that means that we are powerless,
right,
to do anything about it, because that means they're legal, and the companies can do that stuff with impunity, and those corporations have a legal mandate to do everything they can to maximize, shareholder value rather than what is good for the environment or
Right.
good for people or good for their consumers. As long as they can bamboozle people into buying a product, it doesn't matter who it hurts or how much it hurts the people around them or their employees or anything else. It doesn't matter. And those regulations are there for a reason. And yeah.
Yeah, like the point I'm getting at is like you cannot presume that everyone is operating from a place of common sense, decency, or magnanimity, right? You just can't. And I would go so far as to get into the very hazy space as to even say, I don't even think in a lot of cases, like the people that are trying to maneuver and skirt these things are necessarily like evil villain types who are there going, ha ha ha, we're going to cut this and do blah, blah, blah. And ha ha ha, who cares who dies? I'm sure there are some of those. But I think in a lot of cases, they're just focused on the equations of their own business model, which don't factor in human risk, caring for one another. You can't really like put compassion in a spreadsheet. So it's like they have divorced themselves from that type of thinking, and that's why we need regulations. Great, you do your thing, you do your business thing. But by the way, if your business thing infringes on people's well-being or health or safety or freedoms, like that's why we have regulations. And so without them, it's very scary.
Yeah. So that's the Empire in a nutshell.
Right. As I have been rewatching Andor in the last week, in part to prep for season 2, because now I'm hyped up now that we have a drop date. I'm sure I'll rewatch it like 4 more times before then, minimum. But it strikes me more and more now, knowing that we are in this sort of more precarious position in terms of oversight, how much like the Empire is really like the almost cartoon version of all of that coming to fruition, right? Where there's no concern for welfare. It's literally all about protecting the Empire as a machine, right? Partagast has that great thing about, we're what does he say? We're like a health agency, essentially. Like we're ferreting out sickness. But what he means is sickness that impacts the Empire, not people or the common good or anything like that. It's literally just we need to keep this mechanism as perfect as we can and everything else be damned.
Yeah. No, and I don't know. Everything Nemec said was just genius.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one that really worries me, and it's, I don't know, Star Wars has helped me understand a lot. One of the first thing that's helping me not like, and I've said this on the show before, and I even said it a couple weeks ago when I had Stephen Tillman, the Star Wars guru, on the show while you were gone. One of the things that's helping me like not just rage out at every single like person who voted for the incoming president is Jar Jar and Attack of the Clones, right? There are people who were very much fooled by misinformation, and it is hard to, like, when you have that much misinformation aimed at you at all times, it's hard to understand what's really going on.
That's really a good way to look at it. That's a really, really good and healthy way to look at it, I think.
And like,
because I have difficulty finding grace. I will be the first to admit.
I do, and like, so I go to the gym every morning, and one of the machines I use is camped right out in front of Fox News. I know, right? And I hate it. And I ask them every morning, can you just turn off the Fox News? It's not healthy for anybody. And they're like, we have to, because I think Fox News must like pay them to have it on in their machines, on in their gyms or something. But like, I watch like 8 minutes of Fox and Friends every morning, and I get to deconstruct every morning the lies that they're telling based on like actual news, and I'd be angry too if I were watching,
if that were your
Fox
sole
News
source
update.
of information.
If that was my sole source of
Yeah.
news, I'd be a pissed off Trump voter too, because I wouldn't know truth from reality, because it is literally like it does not bear any semblance to reality whatsoever. So like Jar Jar in Attack of the Clones was not given the truth about the Military Creation Act, what Padme wanted, what Palpatine needed. So when Jar Jar went up and put Palpatine up for the emergency powers vote, I understand somebody going up, like, I understand somebody going and doing that to a point. Yes, they should have looked up what tariffs were. They should have looked up how tariffs would affect them. They should have looked up how, what Trump's actual stances on things were. They should have looked up what Project, Project 2025 was. They should have looked up what his stances on literally everything that's going to negatively impact them is. I think that's the thing that frustrates me, is that like the other side would like when everyone votes for Democratic candidates, even the people who didn't like the Democratic candidates will benefit because the policies will benefit them. But when the people who vote for Republican candidates, they will be harmed just as badly by the Republican candidates' policies as everyone else. And I just don't understand it. But the other thing, Andor, getting to my regular point, Nemec, when he said that the pace of our repression outstrips our ability to understand it, and that it's easier for them to hide behind 40 atrocities than a single incident.
Yes.
And that's what I'm worried is going to happen, is that so much is going to go wrong in the next 4 years that we're just not going to be able to understand it, because so much is happening and so much is going to fall apart and so much is just going to be wrong that our ability
that we can't parse it.
Yeah, that we can't parse it. And that's so cogent a point to help me understand, like, that's why we can't just focus. I don't know, it's hard. It's like we can't just focus on one thing. We have to focus on everything. But if we focus on everything, we're going to lose everything. I don't know. It's like maybe we need to divide and conquer some. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know how to behave or prepare. I mean, I was telling you before we started, right? I'm in my F the Empire phase where Marva has become like my personal icon. And I just want every garment I own to have a Daughters of Ferric symbol on it. Just to remind myself that, like, don't go to sleep. Don't be sleeping. I don't know. It's one of those tricky things, right? Because I think, listen, no matter where you land in the political landscape in terms of your beliefs, there is, I think, for almost everyone, this sense that we are in a place of great peril. Like, we are in a very difficult time for our country, for the globe, etc. And for me, I find myself in that headspace where I feel guilt anytime I'm like engaging in joy, because I'm like, it shouldn't be like this. I should be trying to do better every minute. I should be toiling all the time. And that's not productive. That's not a productive way of thinking. It's not healthy mentally or physically, for that matter. So it's very hard. And like, one of the things I'm just trying to do is to be as kind as I can to the people in my life and support them as much as I can, because we're all going to need a lot of that. I mean, I feel like listen, if the election hadn't happened yet and there was no outcome, the people that I love, like, still needed tons of support because it's just a stressful time to live. And that's like part of the hardness of it, right? You feel like you can't catch your breath from being stressed or concerned in a way that enables you to be effective at, making change or trying to uphold the things you truly care about. It becomes like a deep conundrum that is very, very capable of causing like freeze up. So I don't have good advice other than like just know that we're all kind of in this together and we'll do our best to figure it out. We'll do our best to not go to sleep.
Yeah. And I think I don't know. I think Andor is one of those things where it's important that, like, Andor is one of the things about Andor is that there are people who are leading secret lives, doing everything they can in secret, and they're leading public lives that don't necessarily reflect what they're really doing to help.
Yeah.
And that there are a lot of people who are leading very public lives that don't necessarily reflect the personal, internal, secret struggles that they're doing to help advance things. And that it's not going to be helpful for folks to accuse people of not doing enough to help by not making some public statement or by not being very online about things, right? Like, I think that's something that too many people fell into that trap of the last time, is like, well, you're not talking about this publicly enough. And it's like, you're not using your platform. You're not doing this. And it's like, well, I'm doing other things.
Yeah.
Not me specifically, but like plenty of other people. And it's like, trust that if somebody has their heart in the right place, that they're doing what they can with the spoons that they have and the position that they have to do the work of resistance in the way that they can without trying to pressure them to do it in the way that you see they should be.
Right.
And I think Andor really exemplifies that in a way where there's a lot of people who are working to resist in the ways that they can. And it's when they start trying to get involved with how other people are resisting that things start to fall apart.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think too, part of it is just being smart about. There's a lot of discussion about, people siloing off and only talking to other people who see things their way and getting information from people who only see things their way. And sometimes I think that can lead people to feel like they shouldn't, keep their circle tight with people they trust and, can be comfortable around, etc. But like, there is nothing wrong with that. It doesn't mean you are ignorant of the outside world, right? Like, I think so much about that moment at the end of Andor where, there's that group of people on that plane with Jezzy, bless her, flying it. I don't know if you would call it a plane, but anyway, you know what I mean. And like, those are the people that know and trust each other and know they're all in it together. And it's okay to have those little pockets in your life and not feel guilty like you're not including, enough opposing viewpoints. Absolutely be aware of opposing viewpoints, but like, I just feel like that's one of the like things that people have policed and been like, you don't understand, you're in your own echo chamber. And it's like, well, no, you can still be getting all of your information. Like, you are watching Fox News for, however many minutes a day.
Too many.
But But it's not like you go home and you're like, let's turn that on. We need more of that. Like, you want to go home and be with the people that you love and that you are comfortable with, because you need those pockets so that, you can parse the information that you get from disparate views. I don't know. I probably sound like I'm talking out my tail, but I don't know. There's been so much weird, like, you should behave X, Y, or Z to live properly in the age we're in. And I'm like, everybody should be cool to each other and respect that people are going to cope with things in different ways.
Yeah,
That's my thing.
I think I'm too old for people to be policing how I react to the world, and I'm too old to care how anybody else is doing it as long as they're not harming anybody else.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I will absolutely call someone out for harming somebody else, or
yes.
or saying something harmful, right? Like, that's the whole point of Star Wars, is people standing up to create a better world for everyone else, right? Like, again, this is one of those things where, like, I'm not sure why people who are rugged individualists latch on to Star Wars, because it is a group of collectivists that say we're banding together because we cannot stand alone, that we are better together to create a better world for each other. And not only are we going to create a better world for each other, like, look at Rogue One. It's a group of people who get together and say, not only are we going to die for this cause, we're going to die for this cause together, and we're going to die for it so that the galaxy can be a better place, even though we're not even going to survive to see it.
Yeah.
And it might not even get better. We're going to die for that chance that it gets better.
Yeah. I mean, that kind of messaging is so peppered throughout Star Wars, right? I mean, even in, like, little brief lines, Anakin saying, "Mom, you said that the biggest problem in the universe is no one helps each other," right? Like, even those little throwaways. And that's part of why Star Wars is, for me, also such a good coping mechanism in times of stress like this, where I am worried about people in the world. I am worried about marginalized communities. I am worried about, all of the people who may be harmed by bad policy. But if I, just watch a little Star Wars for a while, it's not too long before one of those nuggets will pop up that is both hopeful and inspirational, to remind me, like, okay, great, how can I be helping those people, both in a long-term sense and an immediate sense. And that's kind of what I mean, how I'm using Star Wars to cope and to drive me to help and be better wherever I can.
I'll say this election has actually made me find a lot more hope and value in Rise of Skywalker.
Oh, yeah?
Like, and I mean, it comes down a lot to that line you just mentioned of Anakin's in Phantom Menace, but, like, you've got Rey who's found a darkness in herself, right? And it feels like the darkness I feel like we found in our country, where we thought, like, we were past this, right?
Yeah.
And afraid of what's going to happen. And you have this pettiness, right? This smug pettiness where people are getting subjugated and punished by the First Order, right? Like, and the First Order, right? Like, you can see people all over this new cabinet that look like Hux and Allegiant General Pride and the yes men standing around Trump, right? And they are absolutely willing to destroy any number of Kijimis, right? We're hearing that they want to deport 20 million people. We're hearing that they want to get rid of the Department of Education. We're hearing that they want to, eliminate 20 million jobs in the government. So we're going to get rid of 20 million people. We're going to eliminate 20 million jobs. We're going to We're going to get rid of like so many of the taxes. We're going to cut social services like Social Security and stuff. Like that sounds like a recipe for absolute economic collapse. Like we're going to become like that's a recipe for disaster, right?
Mhm.
And what is our tool for resistance, right? Like we don't have an army. It's not going to be an army. It's just going to be people standing up and saying like, no, we're not going to do that. I read that article about the city of Denver where the sheriff said like, we're going to stand with our people here. And if they try to deport people from Denver, I've got the sheriff's department and we've got all these people that are just going to like form a line and we're not going to let them leave.
Right.
And that gives me that hope. It's that, that's the Denver saying that's that equivalent of all the ships arriving at Exegol. There's more of us than there are of them. And there absolutely are more of us than there are of them.
I'm very curious in the midst of all of this how Andor season 2 is going to play.
Yeah. Well, I mean, knowing Tony Gilroy is still helming it, I think it's going to be just as politically charged.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I will be very curious how it's received since fandom, like all of society, seems to be so deeply split, and a lot of that is along political ideological lines.
Well, it's weird though too. Like Andor seems to be like universally beloved.
Right.
Which doesn't make any sense to me if they split everything along ideological lines. Like, is it just because it's largely is it because Mon Mothma's a legacy character and she's white? Is it because Luthen Rael is white? Is it because Andor can read white enough?
I don't know, because I mean, admittedly, right, like Andor is spectacular television. Like it's such good writing, it's such good everything. And I don't know if it's just a case where people that don't necessarily agree with the message of it are able to like put blinders on to what it's actually saying so they can enjoy the moments of badassery, or something else in play, because all of the various complaints about things since then a lot of them have been like, oh, it's so lefty and woke, and I'm like, wait a minute, no. Like Andor is very much that, so I don't know.
That's the thing though, like I didn't find Acolyte, aside from like the casting, didn't feel particularly
Politically charged.
Yeah, no, it wasn't at all.
Unless you're like really hardcore Jedi can do no wrong. Which like we know that's not true. We've all seen the prequels.
Yeah. Or like complaints about like the prequel or the sequels themselves, right? Like aside from casting, it's not, I mean, it's basically like, well, somehow the fascists returned, which seems oddly prescient. There was, I remember reading some tweets from some folks at Lucasfilm who were working on it earlier, and they were like, really, we're doing this? Like, and it was deep in the Obama administration when they'd started working on it. And it was like, we're really going to go back to like the First Order, and it's kind of like the Empire coming back. This seems kind of tired. And like 2015 rolls around, it's really popular, and then 2016 happens and Trump gets elected, and it's like Charlottesville happens and all this stuff, and they're like, oh, well, I kind of complained about it then, but now it seems sadly relevant, and maybe I was wrong to say, like, maybe this was predicting the future, that like these things do come back. And, I think it's funny that like Trump's reelection has actually softened people on the whole somehow Palpatine returned line.
Right. It's like, oh yeah, I guess that happens.
And everybody feels just that exhausted as Poe does. Like
Yeah.
that exhaustion that Poe feels in that line, like somehow Palpatine returned. Like we all feel that.
Yes.
Because it's like, I don't know how, like, I'm tired. We've been fighting for a long time and we had a lull. But like, geez, guys.
Yeah. Yeah. All of that.
I never hated that line. That line made so much sense to me.
Yeah, it never super bothered me. It's interesting the way people will like grip onto one small thing and get really mad about it. And I'm not saying any of that's wrong, whatever. But it didn't ever bother me either. I mean, we have known, right, that Palpatine has always kind of operated in a space we can't ever fully understand. Like, there are always machinations going on that have never been revealed. There are always like, a million. I mean, we know he had a million contingency plans, so it never struck me as particularly odd. Especially if you have read any of the books that reference him in that period afterwards. Like, we know there was a lot of other stuff going on, that he had these visions of like a much longer run than it would appear he had. So it didn't, it did not surprise me at all.
The other thing about Rise of Skywalker that I think has really hit harder since then in the last few weeks is Rey choosing her identity.
Oh yeah, that's an interesting point.
Like, think about this. Like, Rey is a Palpatine. Rey has the blood of Satan in her veins, right? And so she has to choose, and she sees the darkness in her. She sees this rage in her to the point where she's like hurting people around her. She thinks she's killed Chewie. She's lashing out. She tries to take herself off the playing field and even runs to Ahch-To like Luke does, because she's worried that she's going to hurt the people around her. And she has to make this choice because and ultimately she decides that it doesn't matter how she was raised or what blood is in her. She is going to be a good person despite what people have told her nature is, that she's going to be a Skywalker and a beacon for good. And there are a lot of people who have that choice right now. There are a lot of people out there right now who have been raised to think that racism's okay. There are a lot of people who have that Palpatine blood in them that think like bigotry's okay, that trans people are not okay, that sexism is okay, that misogyny is awesome, right? Like, there are people that have that feeling of superiority in their personal identity, and they have a choice, and they're hurting people right now, and they can choose a better way. They can choose that Skywalker name for themselves. And I think that there's something powerful in being able to just decide that, to take that moniker, to take that mantle, and to have that equivalent on the light side the same way the Sith have that Darth moniker, right?
Yeah.
I think that it's important to be able to do that. So, like, make that choice. Rey had that choice. Rey could have very easily just, like, taken the path of that bloodline that she had, and she rejected it. And those people that thought that somehow their problems were going to be solved, or that the things that they were doing were good, or that somehow oppressing other people was going to make them their lives better somehow, or make them feel better, or by pressing down on the rights of other people, whether they were different from them in some other way, whether they were queer or trans or women or immigrants or whatever. It's not going to make their lives better, and they can choose the light side and help people and be a Skywalker. And I think the rise of Skywalker is a very apt thing that we can be looking at. And I've got a new respect for that movie now. I think the same way a lot of people looked at the prequels after the first administration.
Beautifully said, sir. Meanwhile, I'm just Marva raging over here.
No, I'm that too. Like, really, like Rick's Road. Like Rick's Road is the episode. Like, if you want a very nice double feature of rage and hope, Rick's Road and Rise of Skywalker is a great double feature for how I'm feeling right now.
Yeah.
Rick's Road is such a great episode.
Oh, there are no bad episodes.
No, there aren't. There really aren't. I think my two favorites might be The Axe Forgets and Rick's Road.
Oh, every time I rewatch it, I don't know if it's just because I'm of a certain age and I forget things, but every time I rewatch it, I am freshly blown away by how good the entire thing is.
Yeah.
Even though I know, and I'm forever proselytizing to people and be like, have you not watched Andor? You stop everything you're doing right now. Let's pull it up on my phone. It's not the ideal way, but you got to watch it. It's necessary. And yet, when I stop and sit down and watch it, I'm always like, damn, this is good. It never fails to just awe me.
Yeah. No, it is stupendous across the board. And season 2 is only going to, I don't know, I kind of wish season 2 would have come out before the election.
Yeah, kind of same. I'm honestly glad that we're getting a little bit of Goonies flavored joy here, because I feel like everybody needs a little bit of that. Yeah. And then I feel like springtime is going to feel like the right moment for Andor. I really do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, you know what I mean? At that point, we will be in it. We will be dealing with some stuff, whatever is going to come from the machinations currently in play. And I just feel like there will be some degree of like emotional release to be had from it, and also again, I think it might be inspirational.
Fair. That's an hour, if you can believe it. Where can people find you, Holly?
I am not really on Twitter anymore. I am on Blue Sky, just as Holly Frey, and on Instagram as SurlyGirly5. And I am still on Stuff You Missed in History Class if you want history talk, and Criminalia if you also want history talk plus cocktails. And the Criminalia book, Killer Cocktails, is out. Makes a great holiday gift for the person in your life that likes a libation. Every cocktail has a corresponding mocktail, so you don't have to be a drinker to enjoy it. I think that's most of it. How about you, Brian?
You can find me at swankmotron.com, or I'm not really on Twitter much anymore at all. I kind of locked my account down. You can find me on Blue Sky and other social media platforms as swankmotron. As far as Full of Sith goes, you can find me at fullofsith.com. You can find us at fullofsith.com. Please send us your emails at holocron@fullofsith.com. We're going to try to read emails every week on the show as we get them. We didn't get any this week, but we'd love to hear from you at holocron@fullofsith.com. And if you want to listen to the entire back catalog, you can do that at fullofsith.com. And we'd love for you to rate and review the show wherever it is you listen to it. So unless you've got anything else, Holly.
No, just, expect lots of Ferrix-inspired clothes from me in the coming year.
Then for super producer Mike Pilot and for Holly Fry, I'm Bryan Young, and the Force will be with you always.
Sir, if you'll not be needing me, I'll close down for a while.